Margaret was standing in her kitchen at 6:45 in the morning, still in her robe, cracking open a small bag of walnuts and eating them straight over the sink. 71 years old, no measuring cup, no fuss, just a handful before her coffee, the way she'd done most mornings for the last 2 years. Her daughter had teased her about it at Thanksgiving. "Mom, are you turning into a squirrel?" Margaret just laughed and said her cholesterol numbers had dropped more from that habit than from anything her old diet ever did. And here's the thing that surprised even her doctor. For years, the advice was, nuts are fatty, go easy. Turns out that advice was only half right. Some nuts, eaten the wrong way, really can work against you after 60. But others, the ones most people ignore in the grocery aisle, may do more for your heart, your joints, and even your memory than half the supplements people are spending money on. So here's a real useful fact right out of the gate. Walnuts are one of the very few foods on Earth with a meaningful amount of plant-based omega-3 fats, the kind of fat your body uses to help calm inflammation, which is that slow-burning irritation inside your joints and blood vessels that tends to creep up as we get older. That's not a guess. That's one of the most consistent findings in nutrition science. But before we get to which 4 nuts deserve a permanent spot in your pantry and the 4 that quietly work against you, let's sit with the real question here. Why did Margaret's numbers move on walnuts alone when she'd already cut butter, cut red meat, cut nearly everything her doctor told her to? And why do some nuts, the ones marketed as healthy snacks, barely move the needle at all or make things worse? Stick around, because toward the end, I'm going to tell you about one very common mistake people make with even the good nuts, a mistake that quietly cancels out most of the benefit you're getting. It has nothing to do with which nut you pick, and almost everyone does it without realizing. If you're the kind of person who likes practical, no-nonsense health information, not fads, not miracle cures, just what actually holds up, go ahead and hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me which nut is already in your pantry right now. I'm curious how many of you are already halfway there. Now, let's talk about why this even matters more after 60 than it did at 30. Your body changes in a few quiet ways as you move through your 60s and beyond. First, digestion slows down a little, which means how well you absorb nutrients, especially minerals like magnesium and zinc, starts to matter more than it used to. Second, your body's natural anti-inflammatory processes become a little less efficient, so the foods you eat either add fuel to that slow-burning inflammation or help calm it down. Third, muscle maintenance becomes more of an active project instead of something your body just handles automatically, which is where protein and healthy fats start to earn their keep. And fourth, blood sugar regulation tends to get a little less forgiving, meaning what you snack on between meals has more influence on your energy and your mood than it did decades ago. None of this is something to panic about. It's just biology doing what biology does. But it does mean the choices you make in small moments, like Margaret standing at her kitchen sink with a handful of walnuts, carry a bit more weight than they used to. The good news is that a lot of the fixes are simple, cheap, and already sitting on a grocery store shelf. You just need to know which ones are actually working for you. So let's get into it. The 4 nuts that deserve a permanent place in your kitchen after 60, and the 4 that are worth rethinking. Let's start with walnuts, since Margaret already showed us the appeal. The problem a lot of people notice after 60 is stiff, achy joints. Not necessarily arthritis, just that general creakiness getting out of a chair or climbing stairs. Most people chalk it up to just getting older and leave it at that. But here's the overlooked piece. A lot of that stiffness is tied to low-grade inflammation running in the background of your body, and diet plays a real role in either feeding it or calming it. Walnuts are one of the few foods that contain a plant form of omega-3 fat called ALA. In plain terms, omega-3s act like a kind of internal lubricant and calming signal for your body's inflammatory response. They don't erase inflammation, but they help keep it from running hotter than it needs to. Nutrition scientists have pointed to walnuts specifically more than most other nuts for this reason. They're unusually rich in this particular fat, So that daily handful Margaret eats isn't a trend. It's one of the more quietly evidence-backed habits out there. Next up, almonds, and the problem they solve is a different one: energy crashes. A lot of people over 60 notice a dip in the early afternoon, that heavy, foggy feeling that used to hit only after a big meal and now shows up out of nowhere. The overlooked cause is often blood sugar swings from snacking on refined carbs, crackers, pretzels, that kind of thing, which spike your blood sugar and then drop it hard. Almonds work differently. They're high in fiber and contain a good amount of healthy fat and a bit of protein, which together slow down how fast sugar hits your bloodstream. Translation: instead of a spike and crash, you get a slower, steadier release of energy. Almonds are also one of the better food sources of magnesium, a mineral involved in hundreds of processes in your body, including how your muscles and nerves communicate, which is part of why low magnesium is often linked to fatigue and even muscle cramps in older adults. Third, Brazil nuts. And the problem here is one people rarely connect to diet at all: brain fog and low mood. It sounds unrelated to a nut, but stay with me. Brazil nuts are famous in nutrition circles for one specific thing: they're the richest natural source of a mineral called selenium. Selenium plays a key role in thyroid function, and your thyroid is essentially the control center for your metabolism and energy regulation. When thyroid function is a little sluggish, which becomes more common with age, people often experience exactly what sounds like just getting older: tiredness, mental fog, low mood. Selenium alone isn't a cure for anything, and more isn't better here. But getting enough of it, which just 1 or 2 Brazil nuts a day can do, supports normal thyroid function the way it's supposed to work. And that brings us to something important before we go further. This isn't about eating handfuls of everything. It's about understanding which 4 nuts are actually doing useful work in your body and how little of them you really need. The fourth one worth knowing is pistachios, and the problem they address is one nobody thinks about until it becomes a real issue: blood pressure creeping upward with age. Pistachios are unusually high in potassium, a mineral that works almost like a counterbalance to sodium in your body, helping your blood vessels relax and function properly. Most people over 60 get plenty of sodium without trying, from bread, canned soup, deli meat, but nowhere near enough potassium to balance it out. Pistachios, eaten in their shells especially, tend to naturally slow you down while eating, which also happens to help with portion control. You eat less without trying just because shelling them takes time. So that's 4. Walnuts for inflammation, almonds for steady energy, Brazil nuts for thyroid and mental clarity, and pistachios for blood pressure balance. Each one solving a specific, common complaint, not through anything exotic, just through consistent, small nutritional support your body actually uses. Now, here's where it gets more interesting, because not every nut on the shelf is pulling its weight, and a couple of them might be working against the very things we just talked about. Let's round out the good side first with 2 more angles, then get into what to avoid. Cashews deserve a mention here too, particularly for something people don't expect: joint and bone support. The common complaint is that things just feel a little more fragile after 60. A stiffer grip, a knee that clicks going downstairs. Cashews are a solid source of copper and magnesium, 2 minerals your body uses to build and maintain collagen, which is essentially the scaffolding material inside your joints, skin, and connective tissue. As collagen production naturally slows with age, giving your body the raw minerals it needs to keep making what it can becomes more important, not less. And pecans round things out nicely for something a little less talked about: appetite regulation. A lot of people over 60 either lose interest in food or, on the flip side, find themselves snacking out of boredom rather than real hunger. Pecans are high in fiber and healthy fats, which slow digestion and help you feel satisfied on a smaller amount. It's a small thing, but for weight maintenance, which becomes trickier as metabolism naturally slows, a handful of pecans mid-afternoon can be the difference between reaching for a bag of chips later and not needing to. So that's really 6 worth knowing, though we're focusing on the strongest 4. Now here's the flip side, and this is the part most people get wrong. First on the rethink it list: heavily salted or honey-roasted peanuts. To be fair, peanuts themselves, technically a legume, not a true nut, aren't the enemy. Plain raw or dry roasted peanuts are fine in moderation. The problem is what they're usually coated in. A lot of the peanuts on grocery shelves are loaded with added sodium or sugary glazes, both of which work directly against the blood pressure and blood sugar benefits we just talked about. You could eat a healthy nut and still undo the benefit entirely, just based on how it was processed. Second, macadamia nuts, but only in the way most people eat them, by the fistful, often salted, sometimes chocolate-covered. Macadamias are calorie-dense, more so than almost any other nut, and while the fat inside them isn't inherently bad, portion creep is extremely easy here. A handful often turns into 3 times the amount you'd eat of almonds for the same satisfaction, simply because they're smaller and richer. For anyone watching weight or blood sugar, this is where things quietly go sideways. Third, cashews again. Yes, the same nut we just praised, but specifically when they're candied, honey-roasted, or mixed into trail mixes loaded with chocolate chips and dried fruit. In that form, you're getting a sugar delivery vehicle with a nut inside of it, not a nutrient-dense snack. The mineral benefits get buried under added sugar that spikes blood sugar exactly the way we're trying to avoid. And fourth, flavored or seasoned nut mixes in general. The wasabi ranch, the spicy sriracha, the barbecue blends. These often contain hydrogenated oils, artificial flavoring agents, and heavy sodium loads, all stacked on top of a food that was supposed to be simple and clean. The irony is that people often reach for these thinking they're choosing the healthy snack over chips, when nutritionally some of these blends aren't meaningfully different. So the real lesson here isn't these 4 nuts good, these 4 bad. It's that even the beneficial nuts can be undone by how they're processed, salted, sugared, or portioned, which is exactly why so many people eat healthy nuts every day and don't see the difference Margaret saw. So how much is actually enough, and how do you use this practically without overthinking it? The simplest approach is a small handful, roughly what fits in your cupped palm, once a day, not once an hour. For walnuts and almonds, that's about a 1/4 cup. For Brazil nuts, it's genuinely just 1 or 2, since a little selenium goes a long way, and more isn't better here. Pistachios in the shell are a great choice, specifically because the shelling process naturally paces you. Timing matters a little too. Eating a small handful of nuts alongside a meal, rather than on an empty stomach late at night, helps smooth out blood sugar rather than spike it. A lot of people find pairing a few walnuts or almonds with a piece of fruit in the afternoon works better than eating them alone, since the fiber and protein slow down how fast the fruit's natural sugar hits your system. And the easiest swap of all, if you're already reaching for chips, pretzels, or crackers as your afternoon snack, replacing just that one snack with a small handful of raw or dry roasted nuts is one of the simplest, lowest effort changes you can make. No meal plan required. No giving anything up. Just a straightforward substitution. Let's get into who should be a little more careful with nuts, because this is where a lot of healthy advice skips important nuance. If you have a genuine nut allergy, even a mild one you've learned to live with, none of this applies to you, obviously. And no amount of, but they're healthy, changes that. Beyond allergies, a few other things are worth knowing. If you have gallbladder issues, especially if you've had your gallbladder removed, high-fat foods, including nuts, can sometimes cause digestive discomfort, so smaller portions or spacing them out through the day may sit better than one large handful. If you're managing kidney concerns, nuts like almonds and cashews are relatively high in a mineral compound your kidneys have to process, so it's worth a quick conversation with your doctor about whether portion limits make sense for your specific situation. And if you're on blood thinners, walnuts and flaxseed-type foods contain enough vitamin K and omega-3s that it's worth mentioning to your doctor, just so your medication levels stay balanced, not because there's anything dangerous about the nuts themselves. None of this means avoid nuts. It just means this is exactly the kind of small dietary change worth a quick check-in with your doctor if you're managing an ongoing condition or taking regular medication. Not because something's wrong, but because that's simply the smart way to make any habit change stick safely. Now, the payoff I promised you back at the start. The one mistake that quietly cancels out most of the benefit, even with the right nuts. It's roasting temperature and oil. A lot of healthy roasted nuts on grocery shelves are cooked in cheap, high-heat oils, often the same hydrogenated or heavily processed oils used in chips and packaged snacks, specifically to make them cheaper to produce and longer lasting on a shelf. When you roast a nut in that kind of oil at very high heat, you can actually damage some of the very fats that make the nut beneficial in the first place, while adding exactly the kind of processed fat we're trying to avoid. The fix is almost embarrassingly simple. Flip the bag over and read the ingredients. If it just says walnuts or almonds, you're good. If it lists oil, and especially if that oil is hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated, put it back. Raw or dry roasted, simple ingredient list. That's the whole trick. It costs nothing extra to check, and it's the difference between a nut that's actually doing what we talked about today and one that's quietly working against you. So, back to Margaret, standing at her kitchen sink with her small bag of plain walnuts. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't a supplement or a fad or some expensive superfood shipped from overseas. It was a 5-cent handful of the right nut eaten consistently without added oils or sugar hiding inside it, done almost every single day for 2 years. That's it. That's the whole secret. Small, boring, consistent, and it worked better than most of the more complicated things she'd tried before. That's really the theme running through everything we covered today. Not a miracle, just a small, consistent choice made a little more wisely than most people make it. If you found this useful, I'd love to know. Which of these 4 nuts is already sitting in your kitchen right now, and which one are you going to try adding? Drop it in the comments. I read every one. And if this kind of grounded, practical health information is useful to you, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. We've got a video coming up on the fruits people over 60 eat too much of without realizing it, and it might surprise you just as much as this one did. Thanks for spending this time with me, and I'll see you in the next one.